I'm Emily Carter, 33 years old, the daughter my family trained themselves not to see. For years, I believed silence would keep the peace. Now I know silence only feeds their cruelty. At every dinner, my father carved legacy into my brother's plate, my mother spun excuses into silk, and Mark basked in applause as though it were his birthright. My chair at the table? It was a reminder of what they thought I'd never be. The night they toasted Mark's promotion, my father's voice rang like gospel. This is what the Carter name was meant for. Then Mark leaned back, smirk tugging at his lips, and said, "Sis, maybe I can get you a receptionist job. That way, you'll finally be useful." The table erupted in laughter. Not one person defended me. That was the moment I understood I wasn't invisible. I was erased. Ever been mocked by your own family? Treated like your worth was nothing more than their punchline? Hit like if someone ever tried to write you out of your own story. Comment if you've ever had to carry your value in silence. It all began that night, at the Carter dining table, when humiliation planted the seed of reckoning. I sat at the end of the long oak beast polished to a glossy sheen, the kind of furniture passed down through generations. I sat at the end of the Carter dining table, a long oak beast polished to a glossy sheen, the kind of furniture that had been passed down through generations. Above us, heavy portraits of stern-faced ancestors loomed from gilded frames, eyes forever reminding us that the Carter name was meant to dominate boardrooms, not stumble in the margins of life. I remembered my father's voice from years ago, steady and merciless. The Carter name only shines in the boardroom. He had said it like gospel, a law of nature no one dared to question. Tonight, he lived that truth again, raising his glass toward Mark with a proud, performative smile. My brother's promotion was the star of the evening, the excuse for the gathering. They had all come to celebrate him, the shining sun, the heir who carried the Carter name like a crown. The family dinner had its choreography. David, my father, at the head, his suit jacket perfectly pressed, cufflinks flashing under the chandelier. Evelyn, my mother, regal in pearls, pouring wine as if every gesture was part of her role as Carter matriarch. Mark, my brother, seated near father's right hand, basking in the glow of his latest accomplishment. Around them, uncles and aunts, their voices weaving praise, laughter, and sharp glances in my direction, as though my presence were an accident. "Here's to Mark," father declared, lifting his glass high. His baritone filled the hall. "To his well-deserved promotion at Hamilton Enterprises. He carries the Carter pride forward." Glasses clinked. Applause rippled. I raised mine too, though my grip was tighter than it needed to be, my face frozen in polite neutrality. Inside, the words scraped like shards of glass. Mother leaned across, her voice smooth and coated in honey but sharpened with subtle barbs. "Emily, maybe it's time you think about settling down instead of chasing whatever it is you do." The pause before whatever lingered, heavy and dismissive, a dagger disguised as concern. The laughter that followed was soft, genteel, but it stung all the same. They knew what I did. They knew I had chosen a different path, one without their hand-picked promotions, their carefully paved roads. But to them, it wasn't enough. It never would be. Mark, glowing with the smugness of fresh recognition, leaned back in his chair, smirk tugging at his lips. "If you like, sis," he said, swirling his wine lazily, "I can get you a receptionist job at my department. That way, at least you'll finally be useful." The table erupted in stifled chuckles. Forks scraped on porcelain. No one defended me. Heat rose up my neck. My hand wrapped around the stem of my glass, the crystal pressing into my palm until I feared it would snap. For a moment I considered speaking, unleashing the fury that clawed at my throat. But something stronger held me still, an instinct that silence was sharper than outburst. My eyes, though, betrayed me. They burned, flashing with a fury I refused to voice. I scanned their faces. My father's pride, my mother's smug pity, my brother's mockery. Even the extended family watched, some amused, some indifferent. Every one of them complicit. Every one of them willing to reduce me to the family's failed experiment. I swallowed the bitter taste of humiliation, but beneath it, a seed rooted itself hard, unyielding. Father smirked, clearly satisfied with the theater he had staged. He tapped his glass again for attention, his voice ringing with finality. "Tomorrow you'll meet my boss, Robert Hamilton. Then you'll see what real success looks like." The Carter men celebrate a dynasty built on arrogance. The glass facade of Hamilton Tech's skyscraper glimmered in the sharp September morning sun, each pane reflecting the restless pulse of downtown Chicago. Inside, the air smelled faintly of polished steel and fresh coffee, a sterile temple of ambition. The Carters walked its corridors as if they owned them. David's stride was crisp, precise, the gait of a man who believed he was finally close to seizing the recognition he thought he deserved. Mark, 2 steps behind, radiated the kind of careless confidence only inherited privilege could afford. "This is your chance to shine," David muttered as they neared the executive floor. His hand adjusted Mark's tie, smoothing it down with a precision that betrayed nerves he'd never admit. "Hamilton needs to see you not as my son, but as my successor." Mark smirked, brushing his father's hand away. "Relax, Dad. I've got this. Hamilton already knows I'm the future of Carter bloodline. You're just the warm-up act." A junior staffer stepped past, clutching a folder. Mark turned his grin on the unfortunate man, voice carrying loud enough to echo. "My sister plays soldier. I make real money." The staffer forced a polite laugh, eyes darting away. The cruelty in Mark's words wasn't new. It had long since calcified into the Carter way of displaying dominance. David didn't even scold him. If anything, he looked pleased. "Keep that edge," he said. "Confidence commands rooms." Moments later, David's phone buzzed. Evelyn's name lit the screen. He answered with the same charm he reserved for investors, voice smooth, rehearsed. "Yes, darling, everything's on track. Tomorrow, Hamilton will see Mark as my true successor. The Carter legacy continues, as it always should." Mark chuckled, leaning against the glass wall as if the city belonged to him. "She's probably worried Emily will embarrass herself." "Don't worry, Mom's right. My sister's talent starts and ends with marching in straight lines." David waved him off, but the words lodged comfortably in the rhythm of the day. Every Carter man had rehearsed contempt for Emily until it became tradition. To them, her silence meant surrender. To them, she was already erased. Then David's inbox chimed. He glanced at his phone, his usual smirk faltering for the briefest second. The email subject line was simple: "Meeting agenda with special guest." He tapped it open, eyes narrowing as he scanned the words. Robert Hamilton's assistant confirmed tomorrow's meeting and added one line that shifted the atmosphere. "Mr. Hamilton will be accompanied by a special guest." David's pulse quickened. Guests at these meetings were rare, strategic. Was it a rival? An ally? He masked the unease quickly, snapping the phone shut, but Mark had noticed the flicker. "What is it?" Mark asked, eyebrows raised. David forced the smirk back onto his lips. "Just Hamilton playing his cards close. Nothing we can't handle." Mark laughed, unbothered, straightening his cufflinks with a flourish. "Perfect. Emily will finally see how small she is. They wanted tomorrow to break me. I wanted tomorrow to end them." The words lingered in my chest as I paced across the living room of my penthouse, the city long since drowned in midnight shadows. The lights of Chicago twinkled like distant embers beyond the floor to ceiling glass, but inside, my table was a battlefield. Files lay scattered in careful disorder, classified reports, printouts of system diagrams, notes scrawled in my sharp hand. Every page was a weapon waiting to be unsheathed. I dragged a fingertip across one file, pausing on the section stamped "Confidential." Hamilton Tech's cybersecurity protocols hadn't been updated in over 3 years. Vulnerabilities riddled the framework like termites gnawing at oak beams. If left exposed, the cracks could compromise not only their empire, but national defense contracts tangled deep in their operations. That was what my father never understood. This was bigger than the Carters, bigger than his shallow pride. The phone beside me blinked with a secure line request. I tapped it, and James Wright's steady baritone filled the room. "This isn't just about your family," he said without preamble. "It's about national security. Hamilton Tech's negligence is already on the radar. If their systems collapse, hostile actors won't hesitate to exploit the breach." I pressed the phone to my ear, staring down at the metals glinting faintly in the open closet across the room. "I know," I answered, "but for tomorrow to mean anything, I have to let them underestimate me first. My father, my brother, they think they're parading me in front of Hamilton as a joke. They don't realize I'm walking into that meeting holding the blade." James chuckled, but it was without humor. "You've always played the long game. Just remember, they'll come at you with arrogance. Don't let arrogance blind you in return." "I won't." I closed another file, stacking it with deliberate calm. My mind replayed the likely sequence, the introductions, the smug laughter, the way my father would beam at Mark, as if the heir had already been crowned. I rehearsed the words I'd use, simple and unshakable. No anger, no trembling voice. Just facts, delivered like hammer blows. The silence stretched, broken only by the whisper of city traffic far below. When James finally spoke again, his tone was softer, almost paternal. Tomorrow isn't just a meeting, Emily. It's a reckoning. For them, for you. Be ready to take it all the way. I ended the call, letting the silence reclaim the room. The weight of his words hung there, heavy but grounding. I walked to the closet, reached for the hanger, and drew my uniform into the open air. The fabric was immaculate, every crease a reminder of discipline, every metal a testament written in sacrifice. I placed it carefully in view of the table, where the evidence lay like ammunition. The metals caught the dim light, gleaming like silent testimony, as if daring me to carry them into the fight. Then my laptop chimed. The sound sliced through the quiet, sharp as steel drawn from a sheath. A new email had arrived. I opened it, pulse steady, and there it was, direct, unexpected, undeniable. Robert Hamilton. Looking forward to meeting you, ma'am. Yesterday, I was useless. Today the room froze at a single word. The polished mahogany of Hamilton Tech's executive boardroom table reflected the morning sun, like a stage prepared for its players. I walked in behind my father and brother, their voices full of hollow pride. David adjusted his cufflinks with the same flourish he had rehearsed 1,000 times, and Mark strutted beside him, practically radiating arrogance in his tailored suit. I followed, silent, patient, my briefcase gripped with the same steadiness I had carried through deployments. David cleared his throat as the executives filed in, eager to command the stage. "Robert," he began smoothly, his voice dripping with calculated charm. "This is my son, Mark Carter, the future of our family's business legacy. He's already driving numbers that outshine his peers." Mark leaned back in his chair, smirking as if the empire were already his. "Numbers don't lie," he said to no one in particular, though his eyes cut briefly toward me. The smirk deepened when Evelyn interjected with her well-practiced cruelty. "Emily doesn't really work in anything important," she said with a soft, dismissive laugh. "She likes to pretend, but really, she hasn't found her place." Their voices echoed the dinner table, every note a replay of dismissal. For a moment, time folded in on itself, the toasts to Mark, the derision aimed at me, the sneers about receptionist jobs. But before their scorn could fully land, a new voice broke through the air. "Good morning, ma'am. We've been waiting for you." It came from Robert Hamilton himself. The CEO's presence filled the room with ease, his silver hair catching the light, his eyes fixed on me with unmistakable recognition. The word hung in the air like a gavel strike. "Ma'am." Silence followed, absolute and cutting. The air conditioner hummed, a pen clicked nervously somewhere down the table, but all other sound had died. My father's face drained of color, his lips parting in confusion. Mark blinked rapidly, trying to piece together a puzzle that shattered the certainty he wore like armor. Evelyn's hand froze on her pearls, as if even they refused to rattle in the stillness. I met Hamilton's gaze without flinching, the faintest hint of acknowledgement in my nod. The recognition wasn't exaggerated. It wasn't played for theatrics. It was simply respect earned, not gifted. David coughed, searching for footing, but his words stumbled out awkward. I wasn't aware Emily was involved in your operations, Robert." Hamilton smiled knowingly, letting the pause twist the knife. "Perhaps there are many things you weren't aware of." His attention never left me. Mark leaned forward, disbelief etched into every line of his face. "Wait, what? You're telling me my sister?" Hamilton raised a hand, silencing him as easily as a teacher stilling a child. "Your sister is here on my invitation. She's done work with my team before, work that has nothing to do with receptionist desks or family dinner tables." I inhaled, slow and steady, then set my briefcase on the table with deliberate weight. The sound echoed like a drumbeat through the stunned quiet. Fingers trembling ever so slightly beneath the table, I flicked the latches open. "Let's discuss your company's security problem." For the first time, my father's confidence slipped. The boardroom hadn't shifted an inch, yet the entire atmosphere had transformed. Robert Hamilton gestured toward the empty leather chair beside him, a deliberate invitation that resounded like a challenge. "Colonel Carter," he said, his voice smooth but edged with authority, "why don't you take your rightful seat?" The scrape of the chair against the polished floor was the loudest sound in the room as I slid into it. I didn't glance at David, though I could feel his eyes burning into me. His entire persona, built on dominance and certainty, faltered with each passing second. "She's not part of this business," David said quickly, almost too quickly. His voice cracked ever so slightly under the weight of the moment, but he disguised it with a cough. This is a family matter. Emily doesn't represent Carter interests. Hamilton leaned back, folding his hands with the patience of a man who had seen arrogance collapse before. This isn't just about Carter interests, he replied. This is about Hamilton Tech, national contracts, and who can protect our future. That's why she's here. Mark snorted, trying to reclaim the stage. Emily doesn't know the first thing about this industry. Before his words could drip further, another voice cut through the tension. James Wright, composed in his uniform, had been standing quietly near the back of the room, almost invisible until he chose not to be. His baritone carried across the table with calm precision. On the contrary, Colonel Carter oversees the very division this contract depends on. She's not a guest here, she's the linchpin. The title landed with the weight of granite. Colonel. I saw Evelyn's eyes widen, as though the word had struck her physically. Mark's smirk flickered, uncertain now, the bravado quivering at its edges. My father shifted in his chair, lips pressing tight, as though the room itself had betrayed him. I inhaled, grounding myself, and reached for the remote. The screen behind us flickered to life, bright against the shadows of disbelief. The first slide appeared, a digital map of intrusion points, glowing red like wounds across Hamilton Tech's network. This, I said evenly, my voice calm, unhurried, is evidence of a cyber breach attempt that occurred less than 3 weeks ago. Multiple vectors, coordinated, sophisticated. If left unaddressed, your systems would have been compromised within hours. The room fell into silence again, but it was a different silence now, not disbelief, but the dawning weight of realization. Board members leaned forward, brows furrowed, whispering to one another. Robert Hamilton's jaw tightened, but his eyes gleamed with respect, recognition. This is absurd. David tried again, but his words no longer carried authority. They carried desperation. Emily, this isn't your place. I turned slightly, my gaze calm, cutting through his protest. It became my place, the moment your company's vulnerabilities intersected with matters of national security. Gasps circled the table like ripples. The balance of power was shifting, not violently but inevitably, as if gravity itself had chosen sides. Mark slammed his palm against the table, his voice rising an octave too high, panic bleeding through arrogance. You're making this up. Did you hack us yourself? The accusation hung in the air, jagged and reckless. The room froze once again, but this time every eye turned toward him. Not me. Accusations are easy. Evidence is lethal. Mark's words from moments ago still lingered in the air, acidic and reckless, but I didn't let them sink into me. His panic was his own undoing, and all I had to do was stand still long enough for the world to see it. I clicked the remote again, and the second slide appeared on the screen rows of time-stamped logs, each one a scar etched into Hamilton Tech's defenses. These attacks weren't fabricated, I said, my voice level, precise. They were tracked. 3 months of intrusion attempts, escalating in frequency and sophistication. Every breach attempt logged, analyzed, and countered. The digital lines glowed bright against the darkened boardroom. Some of the board members leaned closer to read the timestamps, their expressions shifting from skepticism to unease. Mark scoffed, too loud. Anyone can make a spreadsheet look official. This proves nothing. James Wright stepped forward, pulling a sealed folder from his briefcase. He laid it on the polished wood table with deliberate care. These aren't spreadsheets, Mr. Carter. These are reports authenticated by the Department of Defense, verified by our cybersecurity task force. Every red mark you see here was cross-checked by multiple analysts. Your sister didn't make them up, she prevented them from taking root. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. One of the older board members whispered, almost to himself but loud enough for the room to hear. Without her, we'd already be compromised. His words cracked the last veneer of doubt that hung in the air. David shifted in his chair, his jaw tight, but his eyes betrayed something I had never seen before. Fear. Still, he tried to grasp control. We've run this company for decades, he said, his voice tight, brittle. Emily's spinning stories to make herself look important. None of this matters without corroboration. I advanced the slides again. This time, the screen filled with encrypted emails dated weeks back, each one marked as priority and addressed directly to Robert Hamilton. I turned toward the CEO, not my father. The corroboration you're asking for is sitting at the head of this table. Hamilton adjusted his cufflinks, calm but deliberate, before leaning forward. His voice carried no hesitation. I received these reports from Colonel Carter weeks ago. Every warning she sent proved accurate. We avoided disaster because she took the threats seriously while you, David, remained oblivious. The words detonated across the table. Evelyn inhaled sharply. Mark's mouth hung open, disbelief draining the color from his face. Even the board members sat straighter, as if history itself had just shifted. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply folded my hands on the table and let the silence hammer them harder than my words ever could. The humiliation was theirs to feel, not mine to inflict. David's composure cracked at last. His face reddened, his fist curled on the table, and he spat the question like a blade thrown across the room. Since when have you been working behind my back with my boss? Enemies expose you. Allies find you in the shadows. The executive lounge was a world apart from the boardroom. A hushed enclave of glass walls, muted lighting, and leather chairs designed for whispered strategy instead of public spectacle. I could still feel the echo of my father's outburst lingering on my skin, but here, away from the gaping stares of the board, the tension shifted into something quieter, sharper. Robert Hamilton poured a small measure of scotch into a crystal tumbler, his movements unhurried, as if the chaos from minutes earlier had been nothing but a rehearsal. He handed me the glass but held my gaze longer than expected. Colonel Carter, he said, voice steady, I trust your judgment. More than your father realizes, and far more than your brother deserves. Today wasn't about humiliating them. It was about protecting what matters. The amber liquid burned my throat as I swallowed, but the warmth that spread wasn't just from the drink. They'll never forgive me, I murmured. Hamilton's brow furrowed, though not in pity. Forgiveness is irrelevant, results are not. James Wright leaned against the far wall, his uniform crisp even under the lounge's softer light. He had the air of a soldier in downtime, but his eyes were alert. Emily, he said, his voice carrying weight without needing volume. This isn't about family pride anymore. Every piece of data you've shown ties into something bigger attempts to infiltrate defense contracts. If Hamilton Tech fell, national security would be next in line. I set the glass down, the ice clinking as if punctuating his words. I already knew the truth, but hearing it out loud made the stakes undeniable. The door eased open, and for a moment I braced for Evelyn's voice or Mark's sneer. Instead, a much younger man entered, nervous, shoulders tense, but determination sharpening his features. His ID badge read Alex Rivera, junior IT staff. I remembered glimpses of him during past visits, always quiet, unnoticed in the shadows of the Carter Empire. He glanced at Hamilton, then at James, before finally settling on me. Ma'am, he said softly, almost stumbling over the word. I think you need to see this. I tilted my head, curious but cautious. Go on. Alex swallowed hard, then pulled a slim USB drive from his pocket. His fingers trembled as he placed it on the table, sliding it toward me as though it carried more weight than it should. Audit logs, he whispered. 3 weeks' worth. Someone's been tampering with internal files, client contracts, financial statements, even cybersecurity alerts. All of it traces back to Mark's login credentials. The words seemed to hang in the air, charged, like the sudden silence before a storm. James straightened immediately, his eyes narrowing. Are you certain? Alex nodded quickly. I triple-checked. The timestamps match moments when Mark wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the system. If this comes out, it doesn't just put the company at risk, it proves deliberate sabotage from inside. I reached for the drive, feeling its cold plastic edge press against my palm. My father's empire was cracking not from outside pressure, but from within, and my brother was holding the hammer. Hamilton's lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't look surprised. I suspected, he admitted, but suspicion without proof is noise. This is music. I slipped the USB into my briefcase, the click of the lock louder than intended. Thank you, Alex. You've done more than you realize. His shoulders sagged with relief, though his eyes still flicked nervously toward the door. I just couldn't keep quiet anymore. Someone had to tell the truth. Before I could respond, a faint sound pricked at my ears, the creak of leather soles against polished marble, too deliberate to be coincidence. I turned my head slightly, catching sight of movement in the corridor through the glass wall. Mark. His posture was half hidden in the shadow of the hallway, but his face was unmistakable, pale and tight with rage. His eyes fixed on the lounge, lips curling as he strained to catch fragments of our words. The USB in my hand suddenly felt heavier. Betrayal cuts deepest when it wears your bloodline's face. The Carter mansion at night was a place of hollow grandeur. The chandeliers glowed faintly above the marble floor, portraits of long-dead Carters glaring down from their gilded frames as though they were keeping score. In David's study, however, the atmosphere was different, thicker, almost suffocating. The heavy curtains were drawn, and the only light came from the green-shaded lamp on his desk, casting long shadows across stacks of papers and a half-empty decanter of bourbon. Mark paced like a caged wolf, his shoes clicking against the wood floor. His face was flushed, not from drink, but from fury. "She's working with Hamilton behind our backs," he hissed. "I heard it myself. Some kid handed her proof, and James Wright was standing there nodding like she was the savior of the company." David's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. The vein at his temple pulsed as he clenched his jaw. "Of course she would," he muttered, rising from his chair. His hand slammed flat against the desk. "I should have known she'd wait until the right moment to humiliate us. My own daughter, my own flesh and blood." Evelyn stood near the fireplace, her hands folded tightly in front of her. Her eyes darted between her husband and her son, her voice trembling as she finally spoke. "David, please, maybe you're overreacting. Emily has always wanted your approval. Perhaps she's just doing her duty. Maybe she doesn't mean to hurt you." Her words were met with a scoff. David stormed around the desk, his finger stabbing the air toward her. "Stay out of this, Evelyn. You've always coddled her. You've always excused her failures. But this is betrayal. She made us look like fools in front of Hamilton and his board." Mark stopped pacing and leaned in close to his father, his voice low but venomous. "Then we destroy her before she destroys us." The silence that followed was broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. David's eyes gleamed with something cold, something Evelyn had seen before in moments of ruthless business maneuvering, but never this raw, this personal. He gave a slow nod. "Yes, she wants war? We'll give her one." Mark smirked, his confidence returning with the shared malice. "We forge the trail, make it look like she's the one who breached the system, tampered with files, sold information to outside contractors. If Hamilton thinks she's a liability, he'll cut her off himself." Evelyn gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Number, you can't. She's your daughter, David, your sister, Mark. You can't turn her into a criminal." David's glare sliced into her. "And what would you have us do? Sit back and watch her dismantle everything we've built? Watch her tarnish the Carter name while you wring your hands?" "Enough." She made her choice. "Now we'll make ours." He sat back down and began scribbling on a notepad, muttering under his breath. "Documents, emails, enough to convince Hamilton she's not trustworthy, enough to sever her credibility forever." Mark leaned over, his grin widening as if victory was already within reach. "I can access the restricted files, alter logs, make it look like her clearance was abused. By the time she notices, it'll be too late." The room seemed to shrink around them, the air growing heavier with each word. Evelyn stood frozen, her heart pounding, her throat tight with unspoken protest. She wanted to scream, to shatter the madness with reason, but David's command still echoed in her ears. "Stay out of this." She sank slowly into the armchair by the fire, her hands trembling. Her eyes drifted toward the family photo on the mantel, David in his prime, Mark in his graduation cap, Emily smiling softly despite standing slightly apart. Evelyn reached out, her fingertips brushing the edge of the frame, but no words came. Her silence was louder than any accusation. "They wanted me buried under lies. I let them dig the grave." The Hamilton tech offices at night were almost eerie in their silence. The usual hum of chatter, the clicking of keyboards, the echo of footsteps in the corridors, all of it replaced by the low, constant buzz of the fluorescent lights. Outside the towering glass windows, Chicago's skyline pulsed with neon and headlights, a restless city that seemed to mirror the unease twisting inside me. My phone chimed, its vibration rattling faintly against the steel table in the small, secure conference room. I glanced at the notification, my heart sinking even though I had half expected it. Suspicious activity detected under my clearance, files accessed, documents altered, all of it pointing directly to me. Alex Rivera's voice broke the silence as he leaned over his laptop, his expression tight, his dark hair falling across his forehead. "Emily," he whispered, "this isn't just sloppy framing. Whoever did this knew exactly which access codes to replicate. They wanted it to look airtight." His fingers flew across the keys, lines of code and timestamps flashing across the screen. Then he stopped, tilting the monitor toward me. But they screwed up. These credentials trace back to Mark's account. Look. The name glared at me in bold text, Mark Carter. I inhaled sharply, a laugh escaping despite the weight in my chest. My brother was nothing if not predictable. Arrogant enough to think he could tamper with a system I had spent years mastering. Still, the sloppiness was almost insulting. Did he truly believe I wouldn't see through it? James Wright's deep voice grounded me. He stood by the window, arms folded across his broad chest, his presence as steady as it had been back in the service. His silver hair caught the faint light, his eyes locked on me with the same piercing authority I had once followed into combat zones. Emily, he said quietly, you could expose this right now. Shut it all down. But if you do, it will look like nothing more than a sibling feud. They'll play the victim. Hamilton's board will see it as family drama, not evidence of corporate sabotage. His words carved into me with brutal precision because I knew he was right. I had lived under the Carter shadow long enough to understand how quickly perception could tilt. My father would twist any revelation, weaponize it as a smear against me, and Mark would play the fool, pretending innocence while basking in sympathy. I closed my eyes for a moment, steadying my breath. The weight of humiliation from that dinner table months ago still lingered, fueling the fire in my chest. I could almost hear their voices again, their laughter, the way Evelyn had looked away while Mark mocked me. They thought this was their moment to finish what they started to bury me beneath forged evidence and smug grins. My lips curved into a smile, cold and deliberate. If they want a show, I murmured, opening my eyes to meet James's steady gaze, I'll give them one. Alex blinked, caught between confusion and awe. Wait, you're saying you'll let them think they've won? I nodded, leaning over to study the fabricated logs once more. Yes, we let the rope tighten. The longer they believe this is working, the harder they'll fall when the truth snaps back. I want them so certain of victory that they won't see the trap closing until it's too late. James's mouth curved into the faintest hint of approval. That's the soldier I remember, not striking when you can, but when it will count most. The three of us bent over the screens, orchestrating silence as strategy, building patience into weaponry. Every keystroke, every forged file we allowed to linger was bait. They thought they were clever. They thought they had stripped me of everything. What they didn't realize was that I had already chosen the battlefield. Hours later, as I slipped my phone back into my pocket, it buzzed again. A new message lit up the screen. Mark, it's working. Tomorrow she'll be ruined. I stared at the glowing words, my reflection ghosted in the glass screen, and felt the cold steel of resolve harden in my veins. They thought they'd bury me with forged evidence. I was waiting with a shovel of my own. The boardroom hummed with tension, a current so thick it seemed to rattle the crystal water pitchers and press against the tall glass windows that looked out over the city. November sunlight cut hard angles across the polished table, and in those slashes of light sat men and women who could sway the fate of one of the country's most powerful tech companies. An emergency session had been called my trial, orchestrated by the people who shared my blood. David Carter sat at the head of the table as if the seat had been carved for him, his cufflinks glinting, his posture rigid with a confidence that masked the fury beneath. Mark slouched just beside him, a predator's grin playing at his lips, eyes flicking toward me like he was savoring the kill. Evelyn lingered further down, hands folded, eyes downcast, her silence another brand of betrayal. Mark was the first to strike. He stood with exaggerated calm, tapping at the screen mounted on the wall. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice oily with pride. What you're about to see is not conjecture. These are files directly linked to Emily Carter classified materials accessed without clearance, funneled through her credentials. The evidence speaks for itself. The first slide glowed in the dimmed room. Stacks of digital records, access logs, security breaches painted with the meticulous precision of a lie. He clicked again, and forged emails appeared, implying collusion, whispers of betrayal against the very institution I had sworn to protect. David rose to punctuate his son's theater, his voice cutting like a gavel. This proves, he said, that Emily has acted against not only Hamilton Tech, but her own government. She is no soldier here. She is a traitor, and she has dragged our family name through the mud for the last time. A ripple coursed through the board. Murmurs filled the air, hushed but sharp. A few faces twisted in disgust. Others shifted uncomfortably, suspicion etched across their brows. The weight of accusation, I knew too well, could break even the strongest if it went unanswered. They wanted me cornered. They wanted the noose to tighten while they watched. But patience had always been my armor. I rose slowly, deliberately, letting the scrape of my chair echo longer than necessary. Every eye in the room followed me, some with doubt, some with pity, some with open contempt. My fingers brushed the surface of the remote as I crossed to the projector, but I did not hurry. Let them lean in. Let them believe I was scrambling for footing. Forged evidence, I said, my voice steady, measured. Always looks convincing until you know where to look. With a click, the slide shifted. Lines of raw metadata sprawled across the screen, indecipherable to some but damning to anyone who had ever navigated a digital audit trail. I magnified one column, circling it with the cursor. Here, I said, are the timestamps for the files you've just seen. You'll notice the edits occurred well past midnight. And here, another click, another highlight, is the login credential. Not mine, not any of yours, Mark's. A gasp rippled through the boardroom, sharp as broken glass. A woman leaned to her neighbor, whispering audibly, "That's his account." Mark's grin faltered, the blood draining from his face in degrees, though he tried to recover with a scoff. This is fabricated! She's doing it again, spinning lies!" I turned, meeting his eyes with the calm I had cultivated through years of silence. Accusations are easy. Evidence is lethal. My gaze shifted back to the board, unflinching. I tracked these breach attempts for months. I didn't just watch them, I documented every keystroke, every shift in access. I sent these very reports to Mr. Hamilton weeks ago. All eyes turned to the CEO at the far end of the table. Robert Hamilton leaned forward, his expression unreadable, but the weight of his presence silenced the room. His gaze flicked from the glowing screen back to Mark, then lingered there. The pause stretched, unbearable for those squirming under it. David shifted, sweat glistening at his temple. "This is a trick," he snapped. "You can't honestly believe." Hamilton raised a hand, his voice cutting through the air with quiet authority. "Mr. Carter," the boardroom stilled. "How do you explain this?" Lies collapse under the weight of truth, they always do. The words lived in me as I stood in that boardroom, the air sharp with tension, as if the walls themselves strained to contain the unraveling storm. Mark's face was pale, David's jaw set in brittle defiance. But the room belonged to the truth now, not to them. I advanced another slide, and the screen filled with more metadata logs. Every entry glowed like an iron brand, each one stamped with Mark Carter's login. I enlarged the forensic trail, times, dates, access points, even the fingerprints of an IP address tied to his own laptop. "You don't have to take my word for it," I said evenly, letting silence hang. "Every single keystroke tells you whose hands wrote these lies." Gasps cut across the room. Some of the board members leaned closer, whispering to one another, while others turned in open disbelief toward David and Mark. Their empire of arrogance had never been questioned before, never picked apart piece by piece. Now it was collapsing under fluorescent light. Then, from the side of the room, a voice spoke with a tremor that steadied as it grew. "I can confirm everything Colonel Carter is showing you." Alex Rivera stepped forward, his security badge flashing under the harsh lights. His knuckles were white as he gripped the USB drive that had carried his risk. "I pulled the logs myself. I know the consequences, but if I stayed silent, I'd be complicit." Mark lurched forward, snarling. "You're lying! You're nothing but a junior analyst. You'd sell your own mother for a promotion." Alex didn't flinch. He met Mark's eyes and answered with a clarity that cut sharper than rage. "The only one selling out family here is you." The weight of those words struck deeper than the evidence itself. Heads turned toward David now, searching his face for denial, for anger, for anything resembling control. But sweat shone at his temple, and though his lips pressed into a line, his eyes betrayed the panic of a man watching his own throne split beneath him. Robert Hamilton rose, tall and deliberate, his presence commanding every corner of the boardroom. He held up a printed page, a copy of the very email I had unearthed through my channels. His voice rang with calm, judicial authority as he read it aloud. "Make sure she never recovers from this." The room froze. The sentence hung in the air like a bell tolling at the end of an era. No one breathed. No one moved. The board members looked not at me, not at Hamilton, but at David, their vice president, their peer, their supposed leader. David surged to his feet, sputtering, That was taken out of context. It's a fabrication. Enough! Hamilton's tone cut like steel. He didn't raise his voice, yet it drowned David's protests. This company will not be dragged into the schemes of a desperate man trying to sabotage his own daughter. As of this moment, David Carter, you are suspended pending formal review. He turned, eyes sweeping the board with a measured gravity. And I am calling for an immediate vote to remove him permanently. The board erupted. Some voices cried support instantly. Others murmured in shock, but the tide was irreversible. Years of arrogance and bullying had left David without allies willing to fall on a sword for him. Hands rose around the table, one after another, until it was unanimous. David slumped back into his chair, his face a mask of disbelief, of fury that no longer found ground. For the first time, the great Carter patriarch looked small, but Mark was not finished. His breath came fast, his skin slick, his bravado cracking as security officers entered the room. "This isn't over, Emily," he shouted, his voice wild, echoing across the glass walls as they moved to escort him out. His words cracked, unmoored, but his glare burned with a promise of venom. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The weight of the truth already spoke louder than anything I could say. Power never disappears, it only changes hands. The echo of Hamilton's voice lingered in the cavernous silence of the headquarters, though it was only in my mind now. Hours had passed since the boardroom had cracked wide open, exposing my father and brother for what they truly were. But the aftermath had its own weight, less explosive, more suffocating. Dynasties didn't fall in firestorms. They collapsed in the quiet hum of paperwork, votes, and signatures that stripped names from doors and titles from business cards. Robert Hamilton called me into his office. His presence, towering and calm, no longer looked down on me as a guest, but regarded me as a peer. He gestured for me to sit in the leather chair opposite his desk. For the first time, I sat where David used to sit, the seat of presumed legacy. "Colonel Carter," Hamilton said, his tone steady but warm. "Effective immediately. Oversight of the federal contract is yours. I trust your judgment, your integrity, and your ability to protect what matters." He pushed a folder toward me, the transfer of authority. The papers were weighty, not with ink, but with consequence. I placed my hand on the folder, but didn't open it yet. My father's ghost lingered in that office, whispering about dynasty and destiny. For decades, his arrogance had been carved into the very walls. Now, those same walls absorbed his silence. James Wright entered not long after, leaning against the window where the Chicago skyline flickered against the night. His eyes were sharper now, not celebratory, but warning. "Victory often costs blood you didn't mean to spill," he said quietly. He wasn't just speaking of corporate casualties or contracts. He was reminding me that families bleed differently. I met his gaze. I didn't spill it. They cut themselves open. But even as I said it, I felt the sting of something colder, the knowledge that truth had its victims, whether they deserved it or not. When James left, Evelyn appeared at the door. My mother, her pearls askew, her face pale under makeup, eyes swollen from sleepless hours. She looked smaller than I remembered, shrunken under the weight of what she had allowed. She stepped inside as though intruding, clasping her hands as if prayer could undo years of silence. "Emily," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never wanted this to go so far. Your father, your brother, they were wrong. But I didn't." The words dissolved into tears. I waited, listening to the sound of her grief, the sound of excuses that came years too late. She looked at me with desperate eyes, pleading not for forgiveness, but for absolution she had not earned. I rose slowly, metals catching the overhead light, every glint a reminder of who I had become without her voice behind me. My reply was measured, carved from the stone of years spent alone. "Silence is betrayal too, Mom." Her face crumpled, a sob catching in her throat, but I turned before she could speak again. My steps were steady, boots clicking against the polished floor. He didn't look back. The office lights reflected in the glass as I walked away, and the metals at my chest shone like cold stars in the dimness. Behind me, Evelyn sank into a chair, tears spilling unchecked. Her sobs filled the emptiness David and Mark had left behind, but they reached no one. The Carter dynasty had burned down not in fire, but in betrayal, omission, and silence. And I carried its ashes with me not as weight, but as proof of survival. Defeat, the bitterest taste to those who believe they could never lose. The Carter mansion once glowed with the warmth of grand dinners, chandeliers blazing like crowns above a dynasty certain of itself. Tonight the lights were dimmed to half their brilliance, and shadows clung to the edges of the dining hall. Dust had settled on corners once polished to perfection. Portraits of ancestors, painted in oils and pride, stared down with judgment at the figures seated below. David Carter sat at the head of the long oak table, the chair that once signified command now holding only the husk of a man. His hands, once steady with authority, trembled slightly as he unfolded a letter that bore the government seal. The words cut deeper than any rival could have: early forced retirement, effective immediately, benefits reduced, reputation marred. His lips pressed into a thin line as though he could chew the ink off the page and swallow it back into silence. Mark slouched 2 seats down, the arrogance drained from him. His phone screen glowed with the final blow, a formal blacklist circulated among industry heads. No board would hire him. No company would return his calls. His name, once buoyed by his father's title, now dragged behind him like an anchor. He clenched the device so hard the casing creaked, as if rage alone could rewrite the digital decree. Evelyn moved through the hall with a silver tray, setting plates of roast and wine glasses as though habit could revive what was gone. Her pearls hung crooked. Her smile faltered each time her eyes flicked to the empty chairs. She tried to orchestrate civility, tried to stitch together a semblance of family from tatters. A distant relative, summoned in vain to fill silence, shifted awkwardly in his chair, offering polite nods, but no words. Forks scraped porcelain in hesitant rhythm. No one toasted. No one spoke of triumphs. The air smelled of seasoned meat, but tasted of shame. David finally broke the stillness, his voice barely more than a rasp. The Carter name used to mean something. He stared at his plate, not at his son, not at his wife, not at the walls that remembered his boasts. The sentence hung in the room, a ghost of legacy choking the present. Mark's jaw worked, but no reply came. Evelyn reached for his hand, but he pulled away, leaving her fingers curled in the cold air. She looked across the table, eyes searching for the family she once believed invincible, and found only silence echoing back. Outside, tires whispered against the gravel driveway. A sleek car rolled past the mansion gates, headlights carving thin beams into the night. Inside, Emily sat at the wheel, medals tucked beneath her coat, eyes fixed forward. She glanced at the darkened windows where her family dined in silence, the dynasty gasping for air. Her lips curved in a whisper meant for herself alone. "It still does, just not your way." And she drove on, leaving the mansion to drown in its own quiet humiliation. Once, they called me useless. Today, senators called me general. The Pentagon Ceremony Hall shimmered beneath rows of flags, their colors vibrant against the marble columns. The air carried the hum of cameras, the shuffle of polished shoes, the murmured anticipation of power gathered in one room. A sea of uniforms filled the front rows, medals catching the light like stars stitched to mortal chests. Behind them, senators, CEOs, and journalists leaned forward, ready to witness the rise of a name once whispered as a failure. Emily Carter stood at the center, her uniform pressed to perfection, the silver eagle insignia now eclipsed by the star that rested on her shoulder. The applause rolled like thunder, shaking the hall not with noise alone, but with recognition long overdue. James Wright stood off to the side, his eyes steady with pride. Robert Hamilton nodded from his place among the honored guests, arms crossed, the faintest smirk of respect touching his face. In the back row, almost swallowed by shadows, sat David, Evelyn, and Mark. David's shoulders sagged in a way Emily had never seen, his tie loose, as though even fabric had given up on him. Mark's hands fidgeted in restless rhythm, jaw locked against the humiliation of watching his sister rise where he had fallen. Evelyn clutched her purse tight in her lap, eyes shining with a sorrow she had never dared speak aloud. For the first time, they seemed small, just spectators to a history they had once believed they owned. The applause softened into respectful silence. A senator stepped forward, pinning the star to Emily's uniform, and addressed the hall. Brigadier General Emily Carter. Justice delayed, perhaps but never denied. May this promotion remind us that perseverance speaks louder than doubt. The words echoed like judgment, not only on Emily's behalf, but upon those who had tried to bury her. Emily turned, saluting with precision, and as her hand lowered, she caught sight of a young officer lingering near the stage. The man looked hesitant, almost shy, until he finally stepped closer. His voice cracked slightly, but his words carried sincerity. "Ma'am, your story gives me hope. My family doesn't believe in me either." Her gaze softened, the steel in her bearing tempered by understanding. She placed a hand lightly on his shoulder, meeting his eyes. Then prove them wrong by proving yourself right. The officer's expression shifted, fear replaced by determination, and Emily recognized herself in his resolve. The ceremony concluded in waves of applause and handshakes. As Emily exited the hall, flashbulbs burst against the cool November air. Reporters surged forward, microphones stretched like weapons. One voice cut above the others, sharp and clear. "General Carter, is this the end of the Carter legacy, or the beginning of yours?" She paused, medals glinting in the winter sun, the star on her shoulder brighter than any doubt. For a moment, she allowed silence to hang, letting the weight of her journey fill the air. Then, with a faint smile curving her lips, she answered, measured and deliberate, "We'll see." The crowd erupted in questions, but Emily had already turned, her stride steady, carrying the Carter name into a future her family had never imagined hers alone to define. Beneath the weight of betrayal, a single truth rose unshaken. The ones who mocked her power were undone by their own deceit. Justice, though delayed, came with the force of inevitability, reminding all that arrogance is no shield against consequence. When injustice is met with unwavering courage, the final verdict can echo through a lifetime. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. If this story struck a chord, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and drop your thoughts below. Comment 1 if you felt her struggle as your own, or 2 if you think justice should have cut even deeper.